At my granddaughter's graduation, my daughter turned to the photographer and said, "Just family, please." Then she looked at me and waited. So I stepped out of the frame and stood on the grass and held her purse while she smiled. I told myself she was tired. I told myself that all the way across town. Then I pulled up in front of my own shop at 9 o'clock that night to drop off a service ticket, and my key would not turn. 37 years my name has been on that glass. Boone Lock and Safe. I cut that key myself. I stood there under the sign with my own name over my head, and I put my face against the window, and I looked past the counter to the back wall where the old safe sits. I knew what was in it. 19 railroad watches that belonged to my wife's daddy. It would be 9 days before I understood why my son-in-law needed me out of that building, and it would be 61 days before I could do one single thing about it. Do me a favor before I go on. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. It matters more than you would think. And while you are down there, answer me this. Have you ever been standing in a room with your own family and felt like the only stranger in it? Say so if you have, because I want to know how many of us there are. My name is Sylvester Boone. Most people call me Vess. I am 69 years old and I have lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee my whole life except for 2 years I do not talk about. I am a locksmith. I have been a locksmith since I was 26 years old, and I have owned my own shop since I was 32. That is not a glamorous trade. Nobody makes a television show about it. But I will tell you what it is. It is the business of deciding who gets in. Every day for 37 years, somebody has stood in front of me and said, I need to keep a person out, or I need to get myself back in. That is the whole job. Everything else is metal. I do commercial safes mostly, jewelry stores, pharmacies, 2 of the banks out toward East Ridge. When a business puts in a vault, somebody has to certify it. And for a long time in this town that somebody was me. I have habits. My wife used to say I had more habits than opinions. I write the install date inside the door of every safe I set, in pencil, on the back of the hinge plate where nobody looks. I have done that since 1979. I keep every service ticket. Paper copies, in a cabinet, filed by month. Time in and time out written on the top line, because that is how you bill, and that is how you cover yourself. And I have had the same post office box downtown for 37 years. Not a mailbox on a road, a box with a key that only I have ever held. My daughter used to laugh at me about it. She said, Daddy, nobody is stealing your mail. I said, Honey, I do not worry about who is stealing. I worry about who is delivering. Remember that box. It is going to matter more than anything else in this story. My wife was Marguerite, Margot. We had 43 years, and she died 6 years ago in February, and I still set out 2 cups in the morning about once a week before I catch myself. Her daddy was Ellsworth Rhymes. He worked 41 years for the Southern Railway out of this city, and he collected railroad watches. Now, if you are under 60, you may not know what that means. Before radios, a train did not have a way to know where the other train was. It had a timetable and a watch, so the railroads set a standard. A watch had to run within 30 seconds a week, or the man carrying it did not work. Ellsworth had 19 of them. Hamilton's in Illinois and 1 ball that he bought the year my wife was born. He left them to Margot. Margot left them to me. And I keep them in the safe at the back of my shop, in a felt drawer, and about twice a year I take them out and wind them and set them and let them run for a day. I am telling you this so you understand something. Those watches are appraised at $140,000. And I would not have taken a dime for them, not 1 dime, and everybody in my family knew that. My daughter is Adelaide. She is 43. She was a surgical scrub tech at Erlanger for 9 years, and she was good at it, and she quit 6 weeks after she got married. She has one habit I want you to hold on to. She folds a towel in thirds, not in half like a normal person. In thirds, edge to edge, corners square, the way they teach you in a hospital. She has done it since she was 22 years old, and she does it without knowing she is doing it. Her daughter is Junie, 17 that spring, smart, quiet, watches everything, and says about a third of it. Junie's daddy left when she was 2. Adelaide raised her alone for 4 years, in my house, in the back bedroom, and I have never been prouder of a person in my life. Then 11 years ago, she married Trace Mahaffey. Trace owns pawn shops, 3 of them now, one on Rossville Boulevard, one out toward Hickson, one across the state line in Georgia. I want to be fair to him even now. He was not lazy. He worked. He came to the hospital when Margot was dying, and he sat in the hall for 6 hours, and that counted with me. But he had a way about him. He called everybody chief. The mailman was chief. The waitress was chief. I was chief. The first time he called me chief, I was 58 years old, and I had known him 3 weeks. And something in the back of my head said, "That man does not intend to learn your name." I did not listen to it. A lot of this story is me not listening to things I already knew. Now here is where it started, and it did not look like anything at the time. 11 months before that graduation, I had a spell. I was in the shop cutting a key, and my left hand quit working for about 90 seconds, and my mouth went thick. The doctor called it a small event. Not a stroke, but the neighborhood of one. He said I would be fine, and I have been fine. But it scared my daughter. She cried in the parking lot of that hospital in a way she had not cried since her mother's funeral, and I would have signed anything on this earth to make her stop. 2 weeks later, she came to the shop with a folder. She said, "Daddy, if that happens again and you are in a bed for a month, nobody can sign a check. Nobody can pay Dolores. Nobody can order stock." She was right. She was absolutely right. So I signed a paper adding her as a member of the company, and I did not read all of it, because my daughter was standing there with her mother's face on, and because a man who has spent his life telling other people to be careful gets tired of being careful in his own kitchen. The paper made her a 51% member. I did not know that for 11 months. I want you to sit with that. The changes after that were slow. They were so slow. Trey started coming by the shop on Tuesdays. He would say, "Chief, you ought to think about slowing down." He would say, "You know, a man your age with your history has got no business up on a ladder." He started handling the insurance, then the payroll service. Then he moved the business banking to a different bank because he had a fellow over there. Every one of those things had a good reason attached to it, and every one of those reasons was true, and that is how it works. Nobody takes a business from you in one afternoon. They take it in 40 small conveniences. Around March, Adelaide got short with me. That is the only way I know to say it. She stopped calling on Sunday. When I called her, she talked to me like I was somebody from the church. I asked her twice what was wrong. Both times she said nothing, and the second time she said it in a way that had a wall behind it. I thought it was the marriage. I thought it was money. I even thought, God help me, that she was embarrassed of me. Then came the graduation, and the photographer, and my key not turning. I went around to the alley door. That one did not turn either. Both cylinders were new. Cheap ones, quickset, the kind I would not put on a tool shed. Somebody had rekeyed my shop with hardware you can buy at a home improvement store, and they had done a sloppy job of it, and the strike plate was scarred where the screwdriver slipped. I stood in that alley a long time. You have to understand what that felt like. This is not a store I bought. I built the counters. I poured the pad for the back step. There is a pencil line on the door frame in the office where I marked Adelaide's height when she was 4. I called Adelaide from the truck. She answered on the 6th ring. I said, "Somebody changed the locks on my shop." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Daddy, the locks were changed because they needed to be changed." I said, "Honey, I am the locksmith." And she said, "You know what you said. That is all. You know what you said." Then she hung up. I sat in that alley until the automatic light over the dumpster came on, and then went off again because nothing had moved. I did not know what I had said. I have played back every conversation I had with that girl that spring, and I could not find it. It took me 9 days to find out, and I found out from a 17-year-old. Junie called me on a Thursday afternoon from her car. She was parked at the Sonic on Brainerd Road, and I could hear the drink machine. She said, "Papa, are you okay?" I said, "I am fine, sugar." Then I said, "Junie, did I ever say anything to you about taking you away from your mama?" There was a pause on that phone that lasted about 4 seconds, and I aged a year in it. She said, "No, sir." Then she said, "But he asked me about you." I said, "Who did?" She said, "Trace, back in March. He came in my room at like 11 at night, and he asked me if you had ever said anything scary to me. He asked me 3 different ways, and then the next morning Mama was crying in the kitchen. I asked her if she remembered the day. Junie said. It was the night before my orthodontist appointment, March the 11th, because I remember thinking it was weird, and then I had to get my wire changed the next morning. I wrote that down on the back of a gas receipt, March the 11th. Then I drove to my house and I went to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. Here is where 37 years of a habit that everybody thought was foolish paid for itself. I pull my tickets by month, March. I flip through them with my thumb the way you flip a deck. And there it was, March the 11th. Service call. Commercial safe, combination change and lock service, Cleveland, Tennessee, which is 32 miles up the highway from my house. Time in, 2:15 in the afternoon. Time out, 6:40 in the evening. Signed by the store manager. Her printed name, her signature, and a phone number. Trace told my daughter I stood in his driveway on the afternoon of March the 11th and threatened to take her child. And on the afternoon of March the 11th, I was in another county with my arms inside a jewelry store safe, and there was a woman who watched me do it for 4.5 hours. I sat down on the floor of that spare bedroom with the ticket in my hand. It was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding does not have a date on it. Somebody had sat down and made a thing up and picked an afternoon for it. Now, a man in my position at that moment has two roads. One is to drive over there and put my fist through a storm door. The other is the one I took, and I want to tell you why I took it, because it is the only advice in this whole story worth anything. I have opened safes for the police maybe 200 times over the years. I have stood next to detectives on drug cases and fraud cases and one homicide, and I learned one thing from them that I never forgot. Do not go get the man. Go get the paper, because a man will look you in the face and lie, and there is not one thing you can do about it. But paper does not care how anybody feels. So I went and got the paper. The first call I made was to Ruben Salcido. Ruben runs an alarm company here in town. 20 years ago, his daddy died, and every bit of the funeral money and the deed and the insurance policy was in a floor safe in a garage on Dodds Avenue, and nobody alive knew the combination. I drilled that safe on a Sunday afternoon and I did not charge him, and I have never mentioned it to him in 20 years, and he has never once let me pay for a cup of coffee. He answered on the second ring and I said, "Ruben, I need something and I cannot tell you the whole thing yet." And he said, "Where do you want to meet?" Here is what I asked him for, and here is why I could ask. Boone Lock and Safe has had a monitored alarm since 1994. Ruben's company holds the account, and the account holder of record, the name on the contract, the man who signs the annual and pays the bill, is Sylvester Boone. Not the company. Me. Because I set it up before there was a company. Trace changed a great many things that year. He did not change that. And a monitored alarm account keeps what they call an open and close report. Every single time that system is armed or disarmed, it logs the date, the time, and which user code did it. That is not a secret, and it is not a trick. It is how every alarm in America works. If you have one on your house right now, you can call your company tomorrow and ask for your own report, and they will send it to you. Ruben printed 12 months of my shop. We sat in his office on a Friday evening with the report on the desk between us and a box fan going, and I read it the way I used to read a train schedule. For 11 months, the shop opened at 7:50 in the morning and closed at 5:30 in the evening, 5 days a week, with my code, User 1. Then, starting the week after my locks were changed, there was a second pattern, User Code 4. Disarm at 2:41 in the morning, rearm at 3:10. Disarm at 2:33, rearm at 3:02. Over and over. Deep night. Never on a weekend. Always under 40 minutes. I counted them. There were 19. Ruben looked at me and said, "Vess, who is User 4? I said, "That is the code I set up 9 years ago for my son-in-law so he could get in if I was sick." And I did not say the next part out loud because my mouth would not do it. 19 entries in the middle of the night. 19 watches in that drawer. I still did not know why. I knew what, and I knew when. But a man who does not know why does not know anything. So I went and found out why, and that took another 2 weeks, and a phone call I almost did not make. There is a fellow named Barrett Nance who works claims and loss prevention for a mutual insurance company that writes what they call jeweler's block coverage. That is the specialty policy that covers jewelry stores and pawn shops and anybody who holds other people's valuables. I have known Barrett about 15 years because I certify vaults. and his company will not write a policy on a vault unless a licensed technician signs off on it. I called him, and I did not accuse anybody of anything. I said, "Barrett, I need to understand something about how memo goods work." He explained it to me, and I'm going to explain it to you, because most people have never heard of this, and it is the whole spine of what happened to my family. In the jewelry business, a wholesaler will send a retailer merchandise on what they call memorandum. On memo, the retailer takes possession of it, puts it in his case, tries to sell it, but he does not own it. Not one stone of it. Title stays with the wholesaler until the retailer pays for it or sends it back. So a pawn shop can have $200,000 of goods in the case that do not belong to him and never did. And once or twice a year the wholesaler comes and counts. Barrett said, and I wrote this down word for word. The count is the whole system. Everything else is trust. Then he said something that stopped me. He said, "Ves, I am not going to ask you why you called, but I will tell you we have a physical inventory verification scheduled at a Mahaffey location this summer, and I have been trying to get it on the calendar since March." I asked him what the date was. He told me. I hung up the phone and I counted it out on my kitchen calendar with a pencil, the way I have counted out delivery dates my whole life. 61 days. 61 days from the afternoon my daughter told the photographer just family. And right there, standing at my own counter with a pencil in my hand, the whole thing came together, and it was so simple it made me sick. Trace was short. He had sold memo goods and spent the money. I found out later how much, and the number was $130,000. And in 61 days a man was going to walk into his vault with a clipboard and count. Now if you are short $130,000 in merchandise, and you have a safe 40 minutes away with $140,000 of pocket watches in it, and you have a code to that safe, and the old man who owns it is out of the way, then you have a plan. He was not selling them. That is what took me longest to understand. He was borrowing them. He was moving them, a few at a time, at 2:41 in the morning, into his own vault, so that when the man came to count, the shelf would not be empty. And afterward, he would put them back, and nobody would ever know. In his mind, that made him not a thief. I have thought about that a great deal since. I want to tell you the low part now, because I promised myself I would tell this straight and not just tell the good parts. 22 days in, I went to the police. I had the alarm report, the service ticket from March the 11th, and a photograph of the drawer where the watches sat. I sat with a detective for 50 minutes, and he was decent to me, and he took notes. Then he asked who owned the business. And I had to say that my daughter is a 51% member of the limited liability company, and that I signed that paper myself, in front of a notary, willingly. He set down his pen and he said, "Mr. Boone, I believe every word you have told me. But what you have described is one member of a company changing the locks and another member disagreeing about it." He said, "That is a civil matter." He said, "If I take this to the district attorney, he is going to hand it back to me and tell me to tell you to get a lawyer." I said, "And if I tell you my son-in-law is moving my property into his vault at 3 in the morning?" He said, "Whose property is it? Is it yours, or is it the company's?" And I did not have an answer for him, because it was in a company safe. I drove home, and I sat in the truck in the carport with the engine off for a long while. That is the moment where most people quit. I am not going to pretend otherwise. That is the moment where a man decides he is 70 years old and tired, and the world is going to go the way it goes. I got out of the truck because I remembered something. When Adelaide was 11, she took a locket of her mother's to school without asking and lost it, and she was so scared she lied about it for 2 days. And when she finally told me, she was shaking so hard she could not hold a glass of milk, and I said, "Honey, I am not mad." I said, "I am never going to be mad at you for telling me the truth." I had said that to her once, 32 years ago, standing in a kitchen, and somewhere between then and now, somebody had spent 11 years teaching that girl that the truth was a dangerous thing to say out loud in her own house. That is what got me out of the truck. 2 days later, I did something I am not proud of and would do again. I drove out to the Rossville Boulevard store at 4 in the afternoon, and I bought a used weed eater for $35 because I wanted to see the inside of that building. Trace was not there. A kid was working the counter, and through the doorway to the back, on a folding table by the safe, There was a stack of shop rags, folded in thirds, edge to edge, corners square. My daughter had been in that back room. My daughter, who had not spoken to me in a month, was up there folding rags for that man like a scrub tech laying out a tray. I carried that weed eater out to my truck, and I sat down in the parking lot, and I put my hands over my face. She was not the enemy. I had been half thinking she was, and she was not. She was somebody's tool, same as I was. Corinne Lattimore has an office above a print shop on Market Street, and she does business litigation and she does not waste words. I laid it all out for her in 1 hour. The membership paper, the locks, the alarm report, the ticket from March the 11th, the 61 days. She told me 2 things I did not want to hear. The first was that I could file to dissociate my daughter from the company and probably win, and that it would take somewhere between 6 and 18 months. She said, "Mr. Boone, the courthouse is a slow train. It gets there, but it does not get there by August." The second thing was worse. She said, "If you file anything at all, the first thing that happens is he finds out you know, and the second thing that happens is those watches disappear for good." I said, "So I do nothing." And Corinne said, "No, sir, you do nothing visible." Then she said the thing that turned it. She said, "Tell me again who certifies that vault." Now here is where I have to tell you about the post office box. Trace changed the bank. He changed the payroll. He changed the insurance agent. He changed the locks. He did not change the mail. For 37 years, everything that comes to Boone Lock and Safe comes to a metal box downtown with a brass door. And I am the only living person who has ever had a key to it, and I have gone down there at least twice a week since Jimmy Carter was president. And 19 days before that inventory verification, a letter came to that box. It was from Barrett Nance's company. It was addressed to the technician of record on the vault certification for the Mahaffey-Rossville Boulevard location. Because Trace had 2 vaults certified, and both certificates on file at that insurance company had one name on the technician line: mine. The policy requires the vault to be inspected and recertified by a licensed safe technician in connection with the physical inventory verification. That is not something I arranged. That is a condition of the coverage he pays for every month. He could have filed a change of servicing technician, but a change of technician triggers a full resurvey and a re-rating of the policy. And the last thing on God's earth that man wanted that summer was underwriters looking closely at anything. So the letter came to my box. And all I had to do was what I have done 900 times in my life: sign it and show up on the day with my tools. I want to tell you what those last 19 days were like, because I do not think the movies get this part right. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel clever. I mowed my yard. I went to church twice. I fixed the float valve in the toilet, in the back bathroom that had been running since before Margot died. And every night I sat at the kitchen table and I went over that alarm report with a ruler, line by line, checking my own work, because the one thing I could not afford was to be wrong in front of my daughter. Junie came by on a Sunday and ate a pimento cheese sandwich standing up at my counter and told me about her roommate assignment at UT Chattanooga. I did not tell her anything. She did not ask. But at the door she turned around and she said, "Papa, whatever it is, I hope you win." And I said, "Sugar, it is not going to feel like winning." I was right about that. Now, if you have been with me this long, and I know some of you have been sitting there through the whole thing, let me hear from you right now, before I tell you what happened in that vault room. Tell me in the comments what you would have done on day 22. When the detective set his pen down and said civil matter, would you have gone home and let it go, or would you have counted the days? I want to know. Because I counted the days, and I am still not sure I was right to. The inventory verification was on a Thursday morning in August at the Rossville Boulevard store, 9 o'clock. I got there at 8:40. Barrett Nance was already in the lot with a laptop bag. There was a woman with him from the wholesaler, a Miss Okonjo, who had flown in from Atlanta and who had the flattest, calmest way of speaking I have ever heard on a person that young. Corinne Lattimore parked across the street and stayed in her car for the first hour because I asked her to. And Adelaide was there. That I did not plan and did not expect. She works the books on Thursdays. Trace came out the front door when he saw my truck, and I watched his face do about 4 things in a second and a half. He said, "Chief, what are you doing here?" I held up the letter and I said, "I am the technician of record." He said, "Well, we can reschedule that part." Barrett Nance said, "No, sir, we cannot." We went in. They opened the store. The first part took 2 hours, and it was as boring as anything you have ever seen. Miss Okonjo counted memo goods in the front cases against a printed list. I did my job. I pulled the vault door, checked the boltwork, checked the relocker, checked the hinge. I wrote up the certification. And then I did the last item on the standard inspection, which is to verify the lock's function and download the diagnostic. Here is the first thing I put on that table. Rubin's report. 12 months of open and close on Boone Lock and Safe. I laid it flat, and I turned it around so Barrett could read it. I said, "This is my alarm account, and I am the holder of record." I said, "For 11 months that shop opened at 10 till 8 and closed at 5:30. Then I put my finger on the second page and I said, and then 19 times, between the middle of June and the 3rd of August, it opened at 2:41 in the morning, on user code 4. Trace said, "That is not a crime, Chief. It is my wife's company." And I said, "No, it is not a crime. Hold on. Here is the second thing. The lock on the safe in my shop is a commercial electronic lock, and it has been since 2016 when I upgraded it. Locks like that keep an audit trail. It is a chip in the lock that records every single opening. Which user code? What date? What time? It holds hundreds of them. That is not a hidden camera, and it is not a trick. Any pharmacy, any jewelry store, any pawn shop in this country with a decent vault has one, because the insurance companies want it. I have enabled the audit function on every commercial job I have done for 9 years. Every one. It is on the install sheet. It is a checkbox. He signed it in 2016 without reading it, the same as I signed his paper without reading it. I plugged in my interface, and I printed the audit on a little thermal printer I have carried in my truck since before he married my daughter. 19 openings. User 4. 2:33 in the morning. 2:41. 2:38. I set the alarm report and the safe audit side by side, and every one of the 19 lined up inside of 2 minutes of each other. Barrett Nance did not say anything. He put on his reading glasses, and he read both papers all the way down, and then he read them again. Miss Okonjo looked up from her clipboard, and Trace said, "All right, look." I moved some of my own inventory around between my own locations, and that was the sentence that finished him, and he did not even know it as it came out of his mouth. Because here is the third thing. Miss Okonjo went into the vault to count the back stock. She came out 4 minutes later and she said, "Mr. Nance, there are 19 antique pocket watches on the third shelf in a felt tray." She said, "They are not on any memo. They are not on any purchase invoice. There is no pawn ticket on any of them. Now I want to explain to you why that mattered so much, and I want you to be able to check it yourself. Tennessee has had a Pawnbrokers Act since 1988. Under it, a licensed pawnbroker has to make a record of every single item he takes in. Description, serial number, who he got it from, and their identification. And he has to report it to law enforcement. That is not paperwork. That is the entire reason the state gives a man a license. 19 identifiable antique watches sitting in a licensed pawnbroker's vault with no ticket, no invoice, and no report is a violation all by itself. It does not matter who owns them. It does not matter what he meant to do with them later. He had solved a $130,000 hole by putting $140,000 of unrecorded property in his vault, and unrecorded property in that vault was the crime. Barrett Nance took his glasses off and folded them and said, "Mr. Mahaffey, I am suspending the verification and I am notifying the underwriter today." And then Trace turned around and looked at my daughter, and that is the last thing I put on the table. I did not put it there for Barrett. Barrett did not need it. Barrett had everything he needed. I put it there for her. I took my service ticket out of my shirt pocket. 1 page. Yellow carbon copy. Softened at the folds. I set it in front of Adelaide and I said, "Honey, look at the date. March the 11th. Time in, 2:15 in the afternoon. Time out, 6:40 in the evening. Marconi Jewelers, Keith Street, Cleveland, Tennessee." Signed by the manager. Her printed name, her signature, and a phone number that still works, and I made sure of that on a Tuesday in July. I said, That is the afternoon he told you I stood in your driveway. I said, I was 32 miles away with my arms inside a safe, and a woman watched me do it for 4.5 hours. I said, I have never in my life said one word to you or to anybody about taking that child. My daughter picked up that yellow paper, and she held it in both hands the way you hold something that might come apart. Then she looked at her husband, and she asked him one question. She said, Why the 11th? And he said, What? And she said, Of all the days, why did you pick the 11th? He did not answer her. And I have thought about it since, and I believe he could not, because there was no reason. It was a Tuesday. He needed a day, and he took one off the calendar. He picked an afternoon out of the air, and it cost my daughter her father for 5 months, and it cost him everything he had. Adelaide stood up. She put that yellow ticket in her purse. She walked around the counter, and she picked up her keys off the hook. And Trace said, Adelaide, come on now, Chief. He called her Chief. To her face, in that room. That is the last thing I ever heard that man say to my daughter. She walked out to the parking lot and stood by her car with her back to the building, and I went out and stood there with her, and neither one of us said a word for about 6 minutes. I will tell you the rest quick, because it is not the interesting part. The insurance company voided the policy for material misrepresentation, and a pawn shop that cannot carry coverage cannot operate. The wholesaler filed suit for the memo goods. The number was $131,000 and change. The state pulled his pawnbroker license in 11 weeks. That was the fastest thing that happened. The district attorney charged him with theft of property over $60,000 and with violations of the pawnbroker statute. In plain words, he was charged with taking things that were not his and with running a licensed business without keeping the records the license requires. He pled in the spring. 6 years suspended, 10 years probation, and restitution he will be paying until he is 65 years old. He did not go to prison. I have made my peace with that. I did not need him in a cell. I needed him out of my daughter's kitchen. Adelaide filed in September. It was final the following June. The watches came home in an evidence bag with a numbered seal on it, and I signed for them at a counter downtown like a man picking up a package. All 19. He had not sold one. He really did mean to put them back. That is the part I cannot get past, and I want to say it plain because I think somebody watching needs to hear it. He did not think he was a thief. He thought he was managing a temporary problem. That is how most of this happens to people our age. Not from monsters. From somebody who has decided that what they are doing is going to be fine by Christmas. And it is never fine by Christmas. The company is mine again. Corinne handled it, and it took 4 months. And Adelaide signed the dissociation herself, at my kitchen table, and then she put her head down on the table and cried, and I put my hand on the back of her neck the way I did when she was small. I want to leave you with 3 things I saw, and then 1 thing I did not expect. The first was a night in October. I went down to the shop after supper, and I rekeyed both doors myself. 62 years old hardware, that front cylinder, original to the building. I took it apart on the counter under the light and I cleaned it, and I pinned it to a new key and I put it back. It took me 19 minutes. 19. I did not notice that until I wrote it down later. Then I stood on the sidewalk under my own name, and I locked my own door with my own key, and I will not lie to you. I stood there and turned it about 4 times. The second was Sunday dinner in November. First one at my table in a year and a half. Adelaide came early and cooked, and Junie set the table. And at some point, I went in the kitchen for ice, and my daughter was at the counter folding dish towels. In thirds. Edge to edge. Corner square. I stood in the doorway and watched her do it, and I thought, there she is. She was never gone. Somebody just had the light off in that room for 11 years. The third was the following March, out at the tailgate of my truck. Junie asked me to teach her to pick a lock. She said it in the way a kid asks for a thing they think you will say no to. I said, all right. I got out a practice cylinder and a tension wrench and a hook pick, and I put it in her hands. And I told her the truth, which is that picking a lock is not force. It is patience. You put a little turning pressure on, and then you feel for the one pin that is fighting you, and you set that one, and then you feel for the next one. You cannot rush it. It will not let you. She got it open in about 20 minutes, and she hollered so loud a dog started barking 2 houses down. Now here is the thing I did not expect. That same afternoon, before she left, Adelaide put a key on my kitchen counter, just laid it down next to the salt. Silver, new-looking, a schlag blank, the kind I have cut 10,000 of. I picked it up and I said, "What does this open?" She said, "My front door." I said, "Honey, you have been in that house 3 months." And she said, "I had it cut in March." I did not understand at first. I said, "This March." She said, "No, Daddy, last March." Last March, 2 months before the graduation. 3 months into believing every word that man told her about me. She had gone to a hardware store, in the middle of the worst lie of her life, and had a key to her house cut for her father, and she had carried it in the inside pocket of her purse for 14 months, and she never gave it to me, and she never threw it away. I said, "Why did you keep it?" And she said, "Because I never quite got all the way there. I have that key on my ring. It is the shiniest one on there, and it will be the shiniest one on there for a while yet, because I only use it about once a week. So here is what an old locksmith would tell you, and then I will let you go. Most doors that get locked on you do not get locked out of hate. They get locked out of fear, by somebody who was told a story about you and had nobody to check it against. If somebody in your family goes quiet on you, do not assume they quit loving you. Ask them what they heard. Ask them the date. Make them say the day it supposedly happened, because a lie always has to pick a day, and a day can be checked. And keep your paper. I am serious. Keep your receipts and your tickets and your calendars and the boring records nobody but you cares about, because there will come a morning when the only thing standing between you and losing everything is a yellow carbon copy with a time written on the top line. I got my shop back. I got my watches back. Those things I could have lived without. I got my daughter back, and I got her back because of a service ticket for a lock job in Cleveland, Tennessee, that I filed away and forgot about on a Tuesday afternoon in March. If this meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and tell me this. Has anybody ever told a story about you that you did not get to answer? And if you know somebody whose family has gone quiet on them, send them this, not to stir anything up, just so they know it is worth asking for the date. My name is Sylvester Boone. 37 years, my name on the glass. And the door opens for me.